Television was brand new. I'd been a journalist then for about 10 years, first on the Dominion, then on the Sydney Morning Herald, then for the Sun Herald in their London office in Fleet Street. And I was on my way back to my job in Sydney because I thought Sydney was a great town, but I stopped off to see my family here in New Zealand, and television had just begun and they were looking for staff, and I had overseas experience and they wanted people with overseas experience. They offered me a job and I said, no, I want to go back to Sydney, and they kept on making offers to the point where I decided, yeah, okay, why not? So I stayed in New Zealand and became one of the first 2 editors of prime time, top rating television news. By the middle 70s, it was evident that at some stage there would be a film organization of some kind. And by the middle 70s, I'd been producing television news for 12 or 15 years, and the job was getting a little routine. On the same day, every year, we'd be reporting the same kind of things. And I was finding that my film life, film societies and film festivals, was in fact more interesting by then than television was. So I started a really strong campaign, such as I've never done before or since in my life, to get the job of selling New Zealand movies when the organization was set up. And I really felt that because of my knowledge in creating and selling the film festivals and growing audiences in New Zealand for film society programs, that I could apply the same processes in reverse to the world. The first New Zealand film to get overseas sales was Jeff Murphy's Goodbye Pork Pie. This was even before it had become a success in its local release, because we took it to the Cannes Film Festival, the market at the Cannes Film Festival in 1980, our first year that New Zealand had been there. But although Pork Pie got sales to countries like Germany and England, and I think most of Scandinavia, we couldn't find any American distributor who was willing to take it, because for North America in particular and the United States, we were so unknown that they weren't willing to take a risk in putting a New Zealand film, what was that, into a cinema. A year later, 1981, we came back with Roger Donaldson's Smash Palace, which was so popular with the critics and the people who were making judgments that we had 4 American distributors lining up to buy it. But Smash Palace then became the first New Zealand film released in the United States. And very quickly afterwards, Sleeping Dogs became the second New Zealand film to be released in the States. There were many of these independent alternative distributors who were looking for films from new sources, who were looking for new talent, who were looking to be able to promote discoveries. And so for the first years of the 1980s, year by year by year, New Zealand films and New Zealand directors were being discovered in a positive and really productive way. And film after film after film got acclaimed as a film from New Zealand. And what was a film from New Zealand? It was a film made by a young and extraordinary talent. And people would genuinely come to us every year in the New Zealand office at markets and say, how is it that New Zealand, with such a small population, every year discovers a new talented director, whereas countries with much larger populations and much more long-established film industries, it can take them 4 or 5 years between discovering a new talent. So this was a very good reputation for New Zealand to be able to earn. The campaign which I ran throughout my 21 years at the Film Commission was always based on promoting New Zealand films, a genre as New Zealand films. The campaign, that particular style of marketing, had its opposition. I've always had a long-standing, quite amicable disagreement with John Barnett, for example, who's always believed that films should be sold by genre, horror, sex, drama, action, whatever, and not by nationality. But my absolute experience time after time was when some New Zealand films were taken away from us and put into other countries' catalogues, that the results almost inevitably were that the film disappeared and got no attention. My experience over 20 years was the way to get attention was to group the films inside the New Zealand catalogue. And as for the existence of the films, without the establishment of the Film Commission, none of these films would have been made. Roger Donaldson had a good success with Sleeping Dogs. The New Zealand box office was extraordinary, but the income from this New Zealand success was in no way enough to enable him to make a second feature. So we should be absolutely clear that without the establishment of the New Zealand Film Commission, there would be no New Zealand film industry. Peter Jackson's career would not have been possible without the Film Commission financial support for his first 3-4 movies. The story of Angel at My Table is a quite wonderful story, although at the time it was terribly stressful, and it was in fact an unhappy experience for all of us for 6 or 9 months. Jane had had an unhappy experience with her first feature, Sweetie, which had been in competition at Cannes and which had been booed really nastily, as only the French can do. So Jane had decided in her own head that she would never again submit herself to a film in a theatre. She would solely work for television, where if anybody was booing, she wouldn't know about it. So the Film Commission did the financial deal, and Jane said she was making 3 episodes as a television series. And the Commission got some words written into the contract which were a little less than compelling about the fact that it ought to be released in cinemas as well. And I was taking these episodes, 50 minutes, with me to festivals and markets and showing them surreptitiously and subversively to distributors, all of whom have said, this is far too good for television, this must be seen in cinemas. And I was taking the message back to Jane and to her producer, Bridget Eichen, and they were being firm and saying, no, we will never allow it to be in cinemas. When they were saying that, I didn't know the whole story of why Jane was taking this strong position because of her experience with Sweetie. But the pressure kept coming on, and Jane kept saying no, and I got more and more miserable because by that time, 89, 90, we had the best distributors, country by country by country, each of whom were ready to sign contracts, and Jane wouldn't let me do it. After 6 months in one particular event, I sat in my office, I think it was probably at Cannes, 2 in the morning, and you think back to the mechanisms you used for communication in those days. Was it faxes? There certainly wasn't emails. Maybe I picked up the phone, I can't remember, but I sent a passionate message to Jane about how these people really had faith and confidence in what she had done and were really professionally and personally committed to being able to release it. And Jane finally, after 6 months of stubbornness, changed her mind and agreed. Things then moved very fast because a friend of mine had become the director of the Venice Film Festival 3 or 4 months after Cannes. He had seen the episodes and he immediately selected the film for the official competition at Venice. Jane then worked very quickly to merge the 3 episodes into one feature film. She came with me to the Venice Film Festival. She was hailed as a genius filmmaker. The experience for her in the Venice Theatre of having her film screened was completely the reverse of the experience a few years before in Cannes, where the Italians shouted and yelled and gave her standing ovation after standing ovation. As soon as Lee Tamahori had finished his cut of Once for Warriors, I sent a copy off to Paris and sat back confident in the expectation that it would be selected for the film festival. The French came back with a no. They said, far too melodramatic, we're not going to show it. So I was left with the worry of wanting to launch Once for Warriors in the month of May at Cannes, but not having any official selection for it. So we set up a world premiere in the market. And our first screening of Once for Warriors was exactly at the same time as a first screening of an English film being sold by a very pushy English saleswoman. And she had persuaded a number of our buyers to go to her film rather than to our film. But we both had full houses. And her film got out 2 minutes before ours and had been a complete bore. People were so pissed off and unhappy with her film. And they came out into a shared lobby between the 2 auditoriums, and they were muttering about what a bad film the English movie had been. Then the doors of our cinema came open. And what happened was, this is an absolutely true story. Our audience came out shaking or weeping or speechless, but everybody was very visibly affected by what they had seen. So the people who hadn't been at Once for Warriors saw the people who had been at Once for Warriors and knew they'd made the wrong decision. And the sales started to come really fast from then on. So it was exactly the same position with An Angel at My Table. The commission, the investors were supporting the talent of the filmmaker and the quality of the New Zealand material without any real ability to judge whether there'd be an audience or not. And in each case, the talent involved created huge audiences. Angel at My Table got huge audiences. Once for Warriors got even bigger audiences.